Welcome to the Global Wellness HQ family of podcasts. We are your international headquarters for resources and ideas and insight in relation to the 9 elements of holistic wellness. Join us as we interview local and international wellness experts and learn how you can implement and improve one element or dimension of wellness at a time. Our experts will share their practical tips on wellness in one of these core areas: emotional, intellectual, occupational, physical, environmental, financial, spiritual, social, or habitual. We created our family of podcasts as a resource for anyone who is looking to integrate the 9 elements of holistic wellness into their daily lives. Welcome to the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. I have my friend Richard Piazza with me. And Richard, welcome to the show. Please tell my guests a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you having me. You want to know a little bit about who I am? I'm a dad. I'm a husband. Living in New Jersey. I am a financial advisor by designation, but really more than anything, I'm a people person. I love working with, meeting new folks, and helping have a positive impact on everything that life throws at you.
I love it. And for the record, this is not going to be a conversation. Richard works with Forest Hills Financial Group. Richard and I are going to talk about a lot of things. I doubt we're even going to cover what he does for a living because I'm more interested in sharing who he is. Richard and I, our first conversation, we talked about horses. So first of all, let's start with horses because I think that's a nice, good way to get to know somebody. You talked about working with horses and doing some rescue. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that? Because I think my listeners will really be engaged by that piece.
Yeah, 100%. So, I guess we initially got kind of involved with horses. My daughter is now 10, and she started riding at an extremely young age. She was probably literally 2, and we put her on like a draft horse. And she's in the 10th percentile from growth and in weight and height. So imagine her at 2. She was a little peanut, and she had no fear, which is what I love about part of her personality. And she just took a liking to it. She was holding the reins, right? And so we just ended up getting more and more involved as she got older. And it turns out that my wife's good friend from childhood, who was actually a hospice care nurse, wanted to start a draft rescue, and she needed some help. So my wife and I are on the board for that rescue. It's called Second Chance Stables and Draft Rescue. It's in Massachusetts, and they basically will save horses that are being sent to like a kill pen or wherever it may be, or horses that were work horses that no longer are in any shape to do what they were meant to do or what they were maybe bred to do, but they still have a lot of good years ahead of them. They just need a loving place to call home and to be rehabbed. There's a lot of care that goes into taking care of a healthy horse, let alone one that's not in the best shape. So, um, we have fundraisers, and we have people come and volunteer their time, their money, whatever it may be, however they would like to kind of contribute. And it's a wonderful place, and it continues to grow and prosper, and it's a blessing to be able to be a part of it.
Now, something tells me you've learned many lessons from the horses. I have. I'd love to. What's your favorite, sort of discovery from being around these horses?
That's an
And I know
awesome
that's a
question.
tough question.
No, like, and we didn't rehearse any of this. So I would say, so first of all, I think animals in general teach us all a really, really good lesson that we have a connection. Even though we may not be able to communicate with them in our language, we are able to communicate with them through like a loving, living language. I'm not really quite sure how to express it, but if anybody that's hearing this maybe has experienced it themselves, they know what I'm saying. And so, horses are just majestic animals. Much larger than you. The energy and the presence when you're near them. At first, you could be a little apprehensive or scared or anxious that this is a large animal that you're almost at its mercy, but they are very gentle animals. On the flip side of that, they also could be extremely stubborn. And so you might, and I'll be like, you know what, I'm gonna get on this horse, I'm gonna ride. So being a part of this rescue, I've gotten on a handful of horses, and it is, they will do what they want to do unless they know who's in charge. And when you get on, if they can sense that you're not the one in charge, that means they're in charge, they're the alpha. um and so just the life lesson is, like sometimes you might want something to happen, but if you're not the one in charge, it's not going to happen. So they're wonderful animals. They love when you care for them, if you're brushing them and brushing their hair out and just grooming them in some way, shape, or form. They'll like kind of look back at you and give you a little nuzzle with their nose, like "thanks, buddy." Like that feels like that you're scratching that itch that I can't reach, right? That kind of feeling. So it's just a wonderful thing to have an opportunity to spend time and connect with animals in different ways.
Well, it's funny. I had a conversation with my kids, and basically we were talking about ho- cats, horses, and dogs. And I said, to a cat, you are their plaything, and they are the master. When they want to be fed, they want to be fed. A dog will love you with all its heart, and it's so excited to see you when you get home. But with a horse, if you win its heart, it will love you with all its soul. And that's, I love that your daughter was riding horses at 2, because that's, when I was a kid, that's how my parents would we were farmers, and we had working horses. And when it was cold in the winter, parents would put us kids up on the back of the horses while we were doing the work so that we'd stay warm. And I literally could ride before I could walk. I mean, I grew up on the back of a horse. And after school, if I'd had a tough day, I had a horse that, you know, I had a friend who was a horse. I was his human. But when I'd go out and have a tough day, somehow he knew, and he'd have his way of signaling me to get on. And I'd literally bareback. He'd get down, let me up,
Yeah.
and we just wander around the pasture and graze. And I'd share. He was my babysitter. He was my mentor. Like we had a relationship, and I can't describe it, but we just he knew I had his back, I knew he had mine, and we could communicate a lot without having to actually speak.
It's amazing. I mean, I don't know what the average lifespan of horses are, but I believe it's like 20 to 30 years or so, somewhere in that range.
Around
And
20, yeah.
20. I mean,
Yeah.
I know some that are clearly well over 20,
Yeah.
but maybe average is maybe 20. And
They're
so,
best, they're like humans, they're healthiest, they have the most life. It's like 20 is about 65 for us. So anything over 20, you're starting to get into the hip joint problems, the knee problems, and things like that. But
but I was the reason why I even brought it up is it's, I have a dog now. He's a soft coated Wheaton, and he is definitely, he tries to be the alpha. But they have this thing called the Wheaton Greeton. And if I'm gone 5 minutes, like we went out last night to a benefit, my wife and I, we left at 5 o'clock. We got home at 10:30, and it was like we were gone for a week, right? It was amazing how
where the hell have you been?
yeah, right. But in some ways, it's almost like the shorter the lifespan, the way I feel like there's more love that goes into that relationship because they got to get it out in however many years they have with you. It must be wonderful having, you said, like, I had a friend who was a horse,
Yep.
to be able to have that relationship for a protracted amount of time, right? A dog maybe 8, 12, 15 years, right? But if you can
Yep.
have the horse around for 20 years, maybe more, that's an amazing relationship to have with a pet, with a non-human, if you will.
Yep.
And have that bond, have that connection for a couple of decades. That's a pure blessing.
Well, and he was literally, I think my parents got him shortly before I was born. So literally, I didn't know life without him. And from my first conscious memory, he was there, and I grieved him when we lost him. But to have him there, like he was, it was a grounding. I wish my kids had that. In this day and age, we got technology, and maybe you get a cat or a dog. We tried goldfish, but we were mourning them every month or so. But with me, it was just he was literally my North Star, and it was just I got excited. I was coming home from school. I was going to spend the evening with my friend. But I think the metaphor for me is relationships with humans. You have to be as intentional as with a horse, because I mean, if you make a wrong move around a horse, you scare them, you're going to get kicked. The horse is not malicious. It was, it's all on you. And I think relationships are a little like that. If you push too hard or if you do something, so we're going to transition into community and relationships. I bring relationships first. If I don't like someone, I don't want to spend any moment of time with them. We're not going to do business together. But I also feel it's up to me to watch my step and sort of make sure the relationship gets to the right direction, because as you said, a horse can be stubborn. It's amazing what a little bit of oats will do to get rid of stubbornness. It's amazing what a little grooming will do to get rid of stubbornness. My father taught me to train horses, not break them, because a broken horse is of no value or interest to anyone. Whereas a trained horse who loves you, they'll do anything you ask, as long as give them little treats and a little rub behind the ear once in a while. Again, not saying you should rub your clients behind the ears once in a while. Give them little
I should try
treats.
that. I share a love of oats myself, so maybe I could be stubborn in my own ways. So maybe I just need somebody to give me a handful of oats to get me to comply.
Yeah, just so there's a little spot behind the ear horses love. Find that spot for your clients, metaphorically, please.
Sure, sure.
In the 2020s, it's generally not looked positively upon to be touching our clients, especially we want to ask permission. But the reality is, if you win a client's heart, they're yours for life, and that's a special relationship. I'd rather work with somebody who likes me than somebody who hates me but pays me anyways.
100%. I could not agree with you more there. I mean, one of the main benefits I get out of the work that I do is that I get to choose who I spend my time and my days with, and how I exert the calories that I have each day.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, if I may, I want to talk about your mindset, because I feel like I've spent a lot of my life learning skills, and I've, figured that most people just need the skills and they need the tools, but I realize people need that mindset. So I'm going to ask you some questions about mindset. You can answer those that feel right. You can tell me I don't want to answer that, but how do you approach a new relationship? What are your thoughts in that? Because to me, you're very much about serving and helping others, but most people are going into the new conversation saying, what can Rich do for me? Whereas I think you come into it and say, you've got that go-giver heart. You're looking at, how can I help people? So how does that mindset develop? Please share.
yeah, I think maybe the most common denominator would be, and I think life has taught me this and experience has taught me this, is you can't go in with an assumption about the way or either a conversation is going to go or a relationship is going to develop. Each and every one of us have unique experiences, an environment that has created the way we perceive things, the way we feel things. And so what I try to do, you talk about having just an open mindset, is just, go in asking the right questions that allows for there to be a level of comfort and trust being built from the first conversation, right? And as you start to uncover and unpack some things that may be really meaningful, that resonate with that client, you want to make sure that you're listening, not to respond, but listening to understand. And if you can do that effectively, that I think allows you to start to, again, start to put the pieces of the relationship together, and people say, you know what, he heard what I was saying, and it almost seems like he understood me in some way, shape, or form. So it's just, experience will maybe say, hey, once you've got what you think is kind of like, oh, I understand what this person is, then maybe you can start to go back on some of your experiences and rely on those. But again, everyone is unique. All of our relationships are unique, and that's what's a wonderful thing about life. You never know what you're going to find a way to connect with somebody on, right? Like, in our first conversation, we had no idea that we were going to have this connection on horses, and at the end of the conversation, we're like, hey, this is wonderful. So just going in, being open-minded, being free to share, feeling comfortable to share is, I think, very important, right? And that's a two-way street. If somebody's going to share things with you, you should be comfortable sharing with them as well.
Well, it's kind of funny to me, Rich, because I can sell. I've been taught all of the classic old school, I can overcome objections. And I always just felt really dirty when I did it. It just was not my personality type. And, everybody's like, "Oh, if you don't do that, you must be struggling." And the reality is I don't know what any individual relationship's going to do, but I do look at each relationship as a portfolio, part of my portfolio. And it's like, okay, if I add value to Rich today, and as an example, our first conversation, I was like, I know some people who work with horses. Let's figure out if we can help the horses. But that has absolutely nothing to do with either one of our businesses. But the reality is, we both want to get to know one another better. I've worked with salespeople. They teach you, situational awareness. You walk into the office and, oh, there's a picture of, my prospect with a big fish. And all of a sudden, I love fishing too. Well, people smell that. Okay, I'm going to say it, horse shit, right? Again, we didn't rehearse this. Sorry to Richard's compliance people, but the reality is, if you walk in with your agenda and you expect, and by the way, I hate sales scripts, because I don't know what you care about. How can I write a script that is generic enough where I can find out what we care about together?
I would counter that. I appreciate what you say, and I'm not in disagreement, but I think you can have what would be not necessarily a script, but you can have a process
Yes,
that
yes.
that
I'm all about process.
yeah, that
Just
allows for conversation to happen, and natural conversation, natural, conversation to come about, but you need to create the environment that allows for that to happen. So,
yeah.
yeah, I think sales scripts, I think potentially it works for some folks if maybe they feel they have their own head trash, like they're not eloquent, they're not
Yeah.
comfortable on the fly, and they would never sign up for what we're doing here, right? And because they don't know where the conversation is going to go, and they
What's this guy
um
gonna ask me?
right. But and so they want that track to run on because they
Yeah.
have an idea of where the finish line is. But and so I think some people do need scripts, and it's probably helpful for large corporations who have varied or myriad, diverse prospects, if you will, across multiple geographic regions and even cultures and religions. There probably is some benefit to that, but I think on a micro scale, when you're sitting maybe one on one or with a family, whatever it may be, or just talking to a friend or a neighbor, that script needs to go out of the, you need to
Yeah.
rip
Well,
it off and have a blank slate to figure out where it's going to go.
Well, it's funny. I have some really good friends who teach sales, and I've observed them. We do that ride along sort of sales conversation, or I, watch videos later, and it's funny because I can see the moment when they go in, they're being natural, and then all of a sudden they look at their watch and they realize there's some time pressure, and then they shift gears, and it's like the Terminator comes out, and it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And one of my favorite things, and Rich, you should do this with some of your people. I love watching the interaction. I love video. I love Zoom for that reason, because we can replay and watch, it's like sports. Um, I like to challenge my people and say, tell me the minute you lost the sale. And I'm not kidding. If you get really good at it, you can see the moment where somebody goes from natural to forced. And it's like, watch somebody who's new to wrangling horses, who's, I'm pulling on the on the bridle, and all of a sudden the horse is like, no, no, no.
Yep.
And so
And,
I'm a big fan of process, but I'm also not a fan of micro scripts that, okay, if they say this, say that. Like, it's, again, who has conversations like that? If you go to the bar and we both have a script, what's the point of us having a conversation? Why would we go for coffee? Why go for a beer? Like,
Yep.
let's just send our scripts out and you and I can go home and watch TV.
Either that wouldn't make it any fun either, right? If my job was all it entailed was regurgitating the same script over and over and over again in order to accomplish some goal that I may have, it would
Yeah.
be the exact opposite of the adulation that I get. I think you were talking about it earlier. The metaphor I use is like, I want to find out if somebody has a pebble in their shoe. I'd love to understand what that is and how can I help alleviate, right? You want to take
Yeah.
that shoe, shake it out. Relief, right? And sometimes you were talking about like pulling on the bridle. It actually, like everything in life, I say everything in life is like a pendulum. People meet my children, like, your kids are the most well-behaved kids. Like, we know that you're putting a ton of that didn't happen by accident.
Yep.
And oh my God, they're angels. I'm like, yeah, well, as far as you see them swing into one way, they swing just as far back the other direction as well. So this balance in life, you might pull on something, you could be tugging on something, trying to have an effect on that thing. The same thing in sales happens. I think it's like you're pushing on a rope, where like you're trying to make something happen and you don't get the results, and then to your point, like those people try to either push harder. But yeah, you can definitely sense. You mentioned my people. I'm not sure because I'm a managing director with the firm, and I have some people in my charge that I
Yeah.
coach and develop, and that's what we're trying to get them to do, is to come out of that. You don't need to be this, to your point, like a robot, right? We want you
Yeah.
to be a human being and connect and just do the right thing, put the client first. Imagine yourself as the client. What would they hope to get out of this conversation? And it's certainly not you going into jumping into script.
Well,
So like,
and the reality is, like, if you think about it, and this is a joke, don't take me seriously, people, but if every prospect weighed 1,000 pounds and had hooves that could crush your skull, you'd be a little more ginger with their feelings. You'd be a little more compassionate, you'd be a little more patient. And why not just pretend that that's what they are? Because the thing is, you can't force a prospect to work with you. And by the way, if you do somehow, your manager's going to get a cancellation call tomorrow. Who wins in that scenario? Nobody. Like, the company loses, the rep loses, the client loses, the world's worse off. So I'm a big fan, and this is why Rich and I are talking today. Is how do you build those relationships? And there's some people out there who say relationships don't matter in business. I promise you that they're not my people. I don't want to work with a transactional. You know, if I want transactions, I go to Walmart. I'm not looking for that in my professional space.
yeah, I mean, a lot of what I do has been commoditized in our line of work. Um, and you can certainly find that if you want something transactional, you can find it extremely cheap. And it's just a matter of value, right? What do you get out of what if that's what you're looking for? Then to your point, I shop at Target and Walmart all the time because
Yep.
there's great
I
value
don't
there.
care. I just want cheap,
Right.
right?
Depending on what you're looking for. And then there's other times where you may have to, go to a different venue that provides a different level of service, but that's because that's exactly what you're looking for. And you
Yeah.
still, the value is not only perceived, but it's real. And that happens in all walks of life.
Well, and it's funny because I have these conversations with my kids. We have very strange between school conversations, and we talk a lot about value because, in my opinion, there are certain things I just want quick and cheap. And if I can get it delivered from Amazon and I don't have to engage with, don't have to put my shoes on, send it to my door. But sometimes you want the experience. And I think one of the things I like to talk about with any business, aside from, obviously the Targets and the Walmarts of the world, but what's the experience you could deliver that would build loyalty and, help people bring their friends and say, you got to meet Rich. He's a great guy. I think we live in a world where we've gotten so commoditized and jaded, we've lost sight of the preciousness of relationships and building those connections.
Yeah, I have a phrase to say like people don't buy the flight, they buy the destination. Right.
Yeah.
And so, like you want the flight to be enjoyable, otherwise that's what they remember, right? Somebody can go on an amazing trip. As a matter of fact, my parents were on a trip. They went They were in a quick trip to Florida. They did a cruise. Everything was pretty much uneventful, but trying to get home was a nightmare. And it took them 3 days. This was over the last in September. We had a lot of storms, and it was just a nightmare for them to get home. And like you hear them tell the story, like they didn't say one word about the trip. All they remembered was that poor experience on the flight. And so
Yeah.
you want to create a canvas where the artist can do its job and they're enjoying the destination and
Yeah.
not necessarily how you got back and forth. And there's an art and some science to that as well.
Well, and that's a great analogy because you think about it, most salespeople sell the minutia of the trip. Hey, you get to stand in a line at the airport for 3 hours. Some stranger's going to touch you inappropriately and pat you down, and like they sell all of the
Yeah, no one's
features,
booking that flight. That's right. That's
and
right.
yet,
Like yeah, you're gonna get
the
delayed, and then your bag will get lost, and
yeah.
then it'll get found.
Some kid will scream the whole way because their ears hurt, and somebody's going to throw up on you, and there's going to be a drunk who's telling you his life story. And meanwhile, there's an empty beach somewhere going, why is nobody here?
That's right.
Because the salesman sold the trip, not the
Yeah,
destination.
yeah. They sold it how the sausage was made, not necessarily the sausage.
Yeah. You're watching and going, no. By the way, I grew up making sausage, so I know how it's made. You don't want to see that picture.
See, another
Just,
thing we have in common. My family used to have a winery. My father and my uncle. My uncle passed at the beginning of COVID. Unfortunately, he was 66, but they had a winery, and we from time to time, it was seasonal. We would make essentially dried sausage, a sopressata, and we would make like 1,000 pounds. Like you see 1,000 pounds of ground pork. Like it's
yep.
a lot. and making it wasn't the greatest thing, but the end
Yep.
product was delicious. Right? Whether it
Yep.
was sweet or hot, it was. I looked forward to it every year. I didn't look forward to making it. I
I
look
hated
I look
making
forward
it.
to consuming it.
My job was to blow out the casings so you could fill them and to crank the meat grinder. So, first of all, the casings were old school casings. I'm not going to explain what they were, but they're not the nice, I don't know what they make nowadays, but they're artificial now. Let's
That's
just
right.
say before they were authentic. They came from the pig, so I'll leave it at that.
Yep.
But yeah, nobody wants to know how the sausage is made. I promise. Now, I warned Rich that I was going to ask some variant of this question, and I could talk to Rich all day. I really adore him, but I also promised him I'd let him get back to his life. Let's talk about cold calling for a minute, because and generally, we're not going to get into the weeds on specifics, but a lot of people tell me that sales is a numbers game, and therefore cold calling is a really good solution for somebody, especially in the well, I think in pretty much any industry, but the professional space. Really, there's centers set up, and when somebody's brought on and being mentored, they said, it's about how many calls you make, and you always got to be. I think I heard one sales trainer say, "Always be calling," and I'm like, "You've ripped off Glenn Ross." But what are your thoughts on the efficiency of cold calling relative compared to building relationships and having people calling you?
So I think that there is some element of truth, right? I mean, in almost any walk of life, right? You get out what you put in. If you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So in some ways, I guess you can look at cold calling as saying there's effort going in, and if you're doing it with an authentic, you know, an authentic approach, you may have a better return on investment, if you will. Like I think just generally speaking, cold calling, while potentially necessary in some way, shape, or form, is not. It can't be the only thing. I try to use the analogy of like you fishing, right? And you have a bunch of lines in the water. One of those lines might be cold calling, but the more effective and the more efficient and the more, um, I think the right way to build a business, especially in my line of work, is to build those relationships. Building relationships doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, and the relationship will evolve and grow over time. And that is because of the nature of that. you might not be able to only build your business that way because it might take so long for it to grow and build and be sustainable. And so I think you need to do things concurrently. You should be looking to develop relationships with people such as yourself, Jeff, so that we can grow and then maybe we can expand our impact and the people that we can reach. But at the same time, you need to be doing some more tactical day-to-day things that do feel a little bit more like cold calling because the two of them together, and as you maybe add more of those lines in the water, just networking with folks, getting involved with chambers of commerce or volunteering at organizations, right? All those different things I think help. And while cold calling is certainly not, I think, a recipe for success on its own, it might be a part of the recipe.
Yeah.
Um, the
And
unfortunate
that's, I
part,
think, where I'm going with this is I know people are like, this is the recipe, this is the dish.
yeah, it's the only
Cold
recipe.
calling.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, especially in sales, they're sold that to your point, or we're not even sold that. They said, "Hey, look, this is what we expect from you. We want you to make, 100 dials a day or whatever it is, and you're gonna get voicemails and hung up on." And I think the unfortunate effect of that is that people's sales blocker goes up as soon as they get a call from somebody that they don't know who may have different intentions. And so it's become more of a challenge for those of us who are leading with a giving hand, who do want to build a relationship. It's a little bit more challenging for us to break through that because they're immediately assuming they're going to be sold, and you have to overcome that. So you talked about objections earlier. That's a common objection that people feel like they're going to be sold right away, even if there's no sale being done.
My default question is, what do you want? I mean, it's not nice, but if somebody I don't know calls me, I'm like, get to the point. You distracted me from something.
I take the exact opposite approach. If I know somebody's cold calling me, I'll draw it out of there. I'll play, let's role play. And they don't know that they're role playing, but I'll make them earn it. And sometimes I'll say, hey, you know what? I'm in a similar line of work. Here's what you did well. Here's what you need to work on. I am not a prospect for you, unfortunately. I'm not going to be buying
Yeah,
anything, so I'm not wasting your time because I'm going to give you some constructive feedback for you. But
yeah.
it's
I
it's
I am I'm kinder to
applicable.
people who call me than who ring my doorbell. I personally believe if you're bad at sales, my job is to convince you to go do something else. So if somebody comes to my door and is bad at sales, I will make them regret ringing my doorbell. Not nice, I know, but I feel like they should be doing something else because they're not being authentic to themselves. They're doing, you could tell they hate what they're doing and they're like, okay, and I'm like, okay, go back to your car, rethink your life, go find a new job. That's, but I am kind, I promise, Rich. Other than that moment, I'm kind. My wife is like, you need a hobby. And I'm like, I got one. Somebody rings the doorbell, I make them regret their life choices. Now, Rich, I'm going to end with a quote from a friend of
Sure.
mine that I can't remember the source, but my friend shared it with me. And she said, a lot of, and this applies to sales, salespeople get so busy chasing butterflies, but if you plant a flower garden, you'll be surrounded by butterflies. And I was like, that is beautiful and deep. So, you are the expert at being rich, and you know so many things about how you build relationships. Is there any questions I should have asked you that I haven't yet?
Jeff, to be honest with you, I'm not even quite sure I fully understand. I'm still lost in your metaphor, which is a beautiful one. I planted some echinacea coneflower because I love gardening. I love
Yeah,
making things with my hands. And
I forgot about that.
the amount of bees, butterflies, just pollinators in general that it has attracted. And so you're talking about planting. My head was just lost in that metaphor that you had. Can you please repeat the question?
Is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't? I feel like I should have
With
asked you how that
with
metaphor
respect
landed.
with respect to what topic? Like
Building
specific
relationships. Yeah.
building relationships. I don't think that there's a question that you haven't asked that I think would have been necessary, but I think more than anything, we touched on it earlier. You just never know how a relationship, what you're going to find as a common denominator, and how you can connect with folks. And I think if we give the opportunity to make a connection, you'll uncover it, right? And so the life is a beautiful thing, and you just never know how you're going to connect with another person or another animal or whatever it may be. And so I think it's just being open minded. I don't know that there's a question that we should have touched on that we haven't, and we can continue the conversation again. I really enjoyed it this time, Jeff.
Well, I love how the metaphor landed, and again, I could not have planned that. I mean, it was just in my head. I was like, "I'm gonna share this," and then I remembered after the fact, you said that you love working with your hands, but here's the thing, you go catch a bee in your hands, what's that bee gonna do? Whereas you plant a bunch of flowers and you sit and let the bee do its thing, you can enjoy watching that bee all day long. The pollinators.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is a beautiful thing for
Well,
sure.
Rich, you are a delightful garden of flowers. So, for the pollinators out there, how can they get in touch with you? Sorry, that metaphor went weird, but how can people reach you and get in touch with you?
Well, they can always, I think, connect on social. I'm available on LinkedIn. Look me up, Richard Piazza. I'm a managing director with Forest Hills Financial Group, based in New York City. I live in New Jersey, and I'm happy to be a resource in any way, shape, or form. I love being a connector of people. That's how we were introduced,
Yeah,
through somebody, a mutual person that introduced us, and I think that's a great thing. Any way that I can be of service to others, I would love to see how I can have that opportunity, and see if I can be, um, fulfill a good, positive energy in this world.
I love it. Well, thank you for being on the show, Rich. It was a real pleasure. Um, I know you have a disclaimer that your department wants to share, but I want to thank you for being on the show, and then we'll share the disclaimer, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, Jeff. Let me just pull this up real quick.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on the show, Rich. And for those, if we said anything that needs a disclaimer, there's a disclaimer. So thank you. And again, somebody cared enough about Rich and I and said, you two need to meet. That's my favorite way to start relationships. So I would encourage people to get to know great people like Rich. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Have a great day.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our show. We hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to either click the link below or scan the QR code to register and listen to other episodes of our podcast. Or if you think your business or you would be a great guest to be on our show, we're always looking for experts in one of the 9 elements of holistic wellness. We'd love to have you. You can either click the link below or you can scan the QR code and complete our speaker intake form. Thank you, and to your wellness.